Okay, so what are we going to be talking about today? Storytelling, part of it, but we'll be talking about news media in the age of the internet. And to talk about news media, I will take you through the history of humanity. I will take you first through the first revolution, language. One of the things that defines us as a species is the fact that we can speak language. It doesn't matter whether it's English or Spanish or Chinese or Hindi or Bangla or Latin or Sanskrit. But what speaking language does is it enables us to tell stories. It enables us to communicate ideas. It enables us to function together as a society, as a group. And therefore, language is almost the first revolution that marks the advance of humanity to a slightly more arguably elevated stage. It makes us slightly different to chimpanzees, though not as much as we imagine. Now, the other big revolution that happens is writing sometime down the line. And what writing does is that enables you to move beyond the prison of memory. Because now you can put down information and you can record it forever, or more or less longer. Paper burns and all that jazz, but if you chisel something in a rock, it stays on. And what enables knowledge to do, or let's say what it enables us to do with knowledge, is that it enables us to explore the amount of knowledge we can keep, store, and build upon as a species. So each generation stands on the shoulders of giants. You're not beginning afresh each time. Each time you operate, you have Leonardo da Vinci to look back to, you have Isaac Newton to look back to, you have Tang Dynasty poems if you're Chinese, you have Kalidas if you are Indian and know a bit of Sanskrit, and so on and so forth. Now, a big revolution happens with, of course, the printing press, because until you're just writing, you're limited in volume, in scale. But with the printing press, you also get the Protestant Revolution. I know I'm speaking in a Catholic country, but the Protestant Revolution, what it enables is suddenly that people can print Bibles, people can read Bibles in their own languages, and suddenly knowledge explodes. And with the explosion of knowledge, you also have the explosion of a lot of scurrilous literature, a lot of anger, venom, religious wars. Those come later. But let's move on fast forward to the internet. What does the internet do that's so different to printing? Anyone? Well, the internet enables anyone, anywhere, anytime to upload whatever they want. Suddenly, the volume of knowledge goes through the roof. So you have blogs, you have websites, you have n number of journals as well being uploaded. You have videos, you have infographics, you have whatever you can imagine on the internet. And with this huge explosion of supply comes perhaps, if we want to use a Christian metaphor, as a Czech economist, a very famous Czech economist does, you get the curse of Adam and Eve. So the curse of Adam is the curse of supply. You will work in perhaps a job you hate by the sweat of your brow and try to satisfy your desire. But perhaps what will happen is, and the desire will be Eve wanting an apple, but perhaps the desire that you have will be something you may not desire, because the desires will be controlling you instead of you controlling the desires. And so, to come back to the era of the internet, what the internet did is it threw up an explosion of content, a veritable smorgasbord. But along with it became the curse, particularly with mobile phones coming into the picture, that you would be deluged all the time. La deluge. Now, how many of you have Facebook newsfeed? Raise your hands. Almost everyone. How many of you are on Twitter? Raise your hands. Almost everyone. How many of you are on Instagram? Raise your hands. Almost everyone. How many of you are watching YouTube videos? Raise your hands. Wow. So that means that you're stretched thin. You're stretched a mile wide and an inch thick. Not all of you. But it also means that you have less time to read longer content. What it also means is that the old world, wherein there were certain gatekeepers who controlled information, there were certain big names with big printing presses that operated out of cities, perhaps like Guadalajara, they have lost their power. And so, you're seeing this profusion of content coming at you at 1,000,000 miles an hour. They're like comets in space, flying by you. And you don't know what to do. And that is the curse of supply. The big challenge, noise. You have so much content at any moment in time at your fingertips, whether it's your mobile device or your internet, that you almost feel deluged. You don't know what is important. That's another challenge. What is important? Is the news feed you get of your friend going and eating pizza or drinking Coca-Cola perhaps more important than, let's say, the cutting of funding of a public school in your town, or the fact that your subway or metro or whatever you call it is delayed and the contractor is overbilling you, meaning indirectly you, it's taxpayer money at the end of the day. So indirectly everything you're paying taxes, but you're not getting schools or public transport or anything in return. Is that more important? Well, we can leave the question for later. Perhaps yes, perhaps not. Depends on which viewpoint you take. Of course, someone like me would argue that the importance of public institutions is such that I would much rather know what was happening with that than whether my friend ate a pizza, which I don't care. I don't like pizza anyway. Now, that question is perhaps important, but an even bigger question is, what is true? Today on the internet, you'll find all kinds of things, doctored images of Gandhi to perhaps baby Hitler. And of course, we have a lovely chap north of the border, a chap named Donald Trump, who lives in his alternative reality universe and declares very loudly and vehemently and with a great degree of conviction that he has never said the things he actually did or done the things that he perhaps most likely did. And no one checks facts the way they used to. Because on the internet, you can find anything. You can find proof that Gandhi was a far-right nutcase and Hitler was a vegetarian who wanted peace. So, it is a strange world we live in. What is true? What is important? These are questions that are up in the air. Now, of course, there's another thing that is important that follows on from noise. In the day and age of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and you know what, Snapchat too, let's not forget that. How do you get context? Now tell me, if you want to understand Mexico, should you know a bit about the conquistadores? Yes? No? Yes, okay. Should you know a bit about the Catholic Church? Okay. Should you know a bit about America? After all, it's Mexico, so close to America and so far away from God. So if you want to know about Pakistan, should you know about Allah? Why? Because it was built on the basis of religion. Should you know about the army that has ruled Pakistan coup after coup after coup? Yes. They are the equivalent of the conquistadores. And should you know about America? Because they were the ones who funded the Taliban initially, which was the Mujahideen, right? Similarly, if you want to understand the Middle East, you sort of have to know a bit about Islam, a bit about Sykes-Picot. Mr. Sykes and Miss Picot were an Englishman and a Frenchman who had jolly good cigars and some good wine and said, "Ah, my dear chap, let's draw some lines on the table, on the map." And the map's on the table, of course. And you get this and I get this. You get red and you can fly the Union Jack, and I get the blue, and we will fly the tricolore and talk about liberté, égalité, and fraternité. And of course, in due course of time, those lines crumbled, decolonization happened, and instead of democracy and freedom and equality and justice, you got lovely people. Nasser, who was relatively better, of course, but then you had a chap named Assad, Papa Assad, and then of course Saddam. And so knowing about this perhaps is important, right? And of course, to understand the modern Middle East, you also have to know about a chap called George W. Bush, who decided there were weapons of mass destruction, and of course he needed to go there to create democracy. And we know a wonderful democracy now exists in the Middle East, and we know there is a particularly egalitarian organization that believes in women's rights called Islamic State that now rules the roost. Apparently it's being hammered these days. But the point is that to understand anything, you need to know context. You need to know the backstory. You need to know the importance and significance of that backstory. But in an age of Twitter, that becomes hard. In an age when our concentration span is diminishing dramatically. According to some reports, we have worse concentration spans than a goldfish. Now, in an era when that is happening, context is difficult. The information's there if you Google it, but you don't know where to Google it because you're swimming in an ocean and you don't have a compass. So it's exhausting and you'll probably drown, and besides, you don't know which direction to swim. And that brings me to a fundamental point. Life is more than 140 characters. Yes, it is. Much more. Life demands a certain degree of attention and reflection. Not all times, otherwise we'll all become Germans. Let's sit down, and study the complete works of Goethe, and then once we are done with Goethe, then we read Immanuel Kant. And then once we are done with Immanuel Kant, then, well, yes, you get the point. But the point is fundamentally this, is that there is a place for contemplation, there is a place for attention, there is a place for reflection, and it's become, in a way, hard. Ironically, at a time when all the information you want is at your fingertips, if you knew where to look. If you were in a big ship, headed somewhere, maybe you could cross the ocean and use it very well. Now that brings us on to a third question that has been nagging me. And it's a unique challenge of the internet. The internet was supposed to bring the world together. The internet was supposed to create us into these cosmopolitan citizens who would have an understanding of each other, where we would reach out, email, and of course, Mark Zuckerberg says his mission is to connect people together. Well, perhaps it is. Perhaps it's also to make a lot of empire building. Perhaps it is also to make a lot of money and, of course, do some empire building. Who knows? But here's the challenge of the internet, is that instead of people getting interconnected, what has happened to a great degree, to a large majority, is that we've retreated into echo chambers. So we read, we watch, we hear what we find agreeable to ourselves. So if you're a right-wing, hard-edged, red-necked Republican, you go to Fox News, and Fox News is the veritable word of God. It's even better than the Bible. It's Bible 2.0. Because the Bible is a big book. Who has the time to read it? But, hold on. The folks at Fox News, and of course, there are some exceedingly intelligent, erudite, cosmopolitan, and lovely human beings there. Incidentally, the women all tend to be blonde. I wonder why. I don't find very many Mexican-looking people or Indian-looking people, or for that matter, African-looking people on Fox News. But that's another question. But the point is that you only listen to the media that agrees with you, whether it is Fox News or it is Glenn Beck, who's a crazy, or I think he's crazy, so that he can't sue me. So, right-wing radio show host. But the same is true for people on the left. The same is true across countries. You come to my country, India, and media is terrible. It is corrupt. It is sensationalist. It has no professionalism. It has dumbed down discourse to such a degree that democracy has become a mobocracy. And so the internet, which was supposed to create this new informed global citizen, has fallen into its own curse of distraction, of distortion, of misrepresentation, of mischaracterization, of self-reverential echo chambers. And instead of bringing people together, it has taken people apart. Now, before you think I'm all doom and gloom and I'm a modern-day Cassandra, I want to take a step back and say, whilst that is true, these are also the early days of the internet. The internet, like any other thing, especially any other technology, is a value-neutral phenomenon. What do I mean by that? You look up on the website, that's fair. We thought very hard when we set out to confront the media realities of today. We thought, look, today is an era where most of you, the shoes you're wearing, I bet, if they are sneakers, were made in Vietnam or they were made in China. I can bet your t-shirts probably were made in Asia too. The camera both of you are using was probably made in Asia, probably China. Now, even the food you eat may be coming from elsewhere. The cars you drive, the car in which I came today and in which I've been traveling every day, is all Japanese technology. Manufactured here, but Japanese. So at a time when people's lives are so intertwined, when different regions, when different cultures are so interconnected, it does not make sense that we do not know about each other. Particularly when we are facing problems such as climate change. Of course, that's a myth if you believe the Americano right-wing media. They will tell you it's all a conspiracy of elites like me. Although I don't know how I'm elite when they have all the money. That's a separate question. That brings me on to the second point, which is inequality is now a global phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that is almost unbelievable. And the third point that I raised about retreating into echo chambers, it is directly tied into the demand side of things. So the supply, as I told you, Well, noise, lack of context, that is because of cell phones, constant content, that's the supply side. The demand side of wanting to go to echo chambers is directly connected to the way the world has turned after the collapse of communism. Now, no one here in their right minds would want to go back to the day of Uncle Stalin, because someone like me would be sent off to Siberia and would certainly die because I cannot hold my tongue. So that wasn't a great society. It had massive flaws. Having said that, what has happened since the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and even before that, actually the villain of the story, the grand villain of the story, is Ronald Reagan. And why is he the grand villain of the story? The reason is very simply this. Reagan began his election campaign in Neshoba County. Most people don't know this. Why is Neshoba County important? Well, how many of you have seen the film Mississippi Burning? All right. Two of your faculty members. You better start talking to both of them. Jose and Juan, right? Go and talk to both of them. And organize a screening of Mississippi Burning in this hall. Why is it important? Because there was a civil rights movement. People went to register black voters. People wanted segregation to end. And the Ku Klux Klan burnt 3 white young volunteers, young students, by the Mississippi, and their bodies vanished, and there was a big FBI investigation, and they were eventually found, and this all happened in Neshoba County. And so when Reagan begins his election campaign there, what is that a signal of? And he talks about states' rights. What is that a signal of? It's okay. White supremacy is okay. That is, he was speaking in code. States' rights means the states should have the rights to do as they deem fit. So if they want segregation, that's okay. Take it to the logical extension. Ku Klux Klan's argument. If they want slavery, that's okay, because they have the right to it. That's the right of the states of the United States. Washington, D.C. has no role, no say, no remit to intervene. And so when you're beginning your election campaign in Neshoba, what are you doing? You're playing dog whistle politics. You know what is a dog whistle? You don't hear it because the range of frequencies your ear can hear is limited. But the dog has a wider range. And when you whistle, the dog can hear it. And so the Reagan Revolution is about playing dog whistle politics with a certain type of voter. Mind you, he also supported apartheid. How many of you think Nelson Mandela was an okay chap? Raise your hands. Okay, how many of you think he was a terrorist? No one. Okay, Reagan thought he was a terrorist. And Reagan supported the apartheid regime. How many of you would support apartheid? Raise your hands. No one. Okay. So, the interesting thing is that with that revolution came a pushback when it came to public services. Public schools went down over time. Public universities went down. I've taught in one, Berkeley. I can tell you it isn't what it once was. And public media went down. And so, when education declines, what happens? Discourse declines. The reason Germany has good media, the reason England has good media, the reason Denmark has good media, the reason Sweden has good media is because you have a highly educated populace, a highly educated electorate. And so the gradual underinvestment in public institutions, that has happened in particular in my country. In my country, even those in slums send their children to private school. It's crazy. The government has money to spend on all kinds of stuff, including public universities at the elite level, which I think is a decent idea, but they underinvest in education. And the reason is very simple. If the electorate is not educated, then you can feed it sensationalist propaganda, and it will not hold the powerful accountable. So that means if there's taxpayers' money, you can take it and put it in your pocket. And as Robert Browning said, God's in heaven and all's right with the world. Hallelujah. Now, some of us might have a problem with that worldview. And so, given that situation, given the fact that the zeitgeist, another German term, had turned, particularly after Reagan and particularly after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we thought, well, hang on a moment. Some things matter. Discourse matters. Voices from around the world matter. Is it important that the voices from Latin America in general and Mexico in particular about globalization, about the world economy, about the immigration crisis, which is happening in Mexico, as I have learned over the last few days, not just in the US. Someone called American Dream and Mexican Nightmare in the presentation on Saturday, which I thought was a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant title. That voices of Latin America in general and voices from Mexico in particular should be heard globally. How many of you would raise your hands? Would you like your voices to be heard in India, Africa, Germany, elsewhere? Most of you say yes. But the representation of Mexico comes invariably from north of the border, from Uncle Sam, where a certain presidential candidate says that Mexicans are rapists. Perhaps it might be a good idea for us to learn what Mexicans think of Donald Trump. I mean, I know a lot of Indians would like to know that. I know a lot of Kenyans would like to know that. And so that brings me on to a fundamental part of the story. And the fundamental part of the story is that perhaps Fair Observer was born subconsciously, in my mind, when I was still a child. When I was young, my father gave me 4 children's history books to read, 4. One of them was obviously Indian, because I am Indian. One of them was British, because they were our colonial masters. And of course, I arrived like Mowgli in a loincloth at Oxford, and they taught me how to wear a suit and a tie. And not just any suit and a tie, a pinstriped suit and a red tie, and a shirt with cufflinks. So I'm really civilized now. As the French would say, mission civilisatrice. C'est un succès. So things turned out very well, jolly good for me. So, but that was not enough. He had picked up this fantastic 10-volume set from an American ship. So I read the American narrative too. So the Indian, the British, and then in those days, the Soviets used to sell a world history book for 12 rupees. Just to tell you what the value of the rupee, I don't exactly remember what it was then, but wasn't terribly much compared to the dollar. Today, it's 60 or 70 rupees is a dollar. So 12 rupees, let's say, is 20 cents. I think it's 5 Mexican pesos to a dollar. So it's a Mexican dollar. That's it. And it was a beautiful colored book with glazed paper. Perhaps that's why the Soviet Union collapsed, because if you're going to spend so much money printing children's history books and selling it all around the world at a loss, your people will go without bread. Maybe they should have sold it at market price. Anyway, but the point is, I read the British, the Indian, the Soviet, and the American narratives, and I would walk up to my father with a twinkle in my eye, no, not with a twinkle in my eye, with utter confusion actually, and say, Papa, there are 4 stories here. Which one of them is true? And he would reply with a twinkle in his eye, that's for you to figure out. And he said something that has stayed with me till today. You can never see through someone else's eye or feel through someone else's finger. What do you think? And fast forward many years, I'm in New York 2010 in a so-called global conference. It's very Americano, it's not global at all. They are talking about news and whatnot, and it's not news, it's noise. And I said, this is madness. This is absolute madness. And I thought we needed a journal, or we needed a media organization that would focus on issues that matter. Number one, very important, focus on things that are truly substantive and significant and matter across space and time. Cut through the noise. Number two, provide context. If people are reading about Mexico, they should hopefully know where it is on the map. That's the first step. They should also know that Mexicans speak Spanish. Second step. They should probably know that Mexicans are more than just taco eaters. They should also perhaps know that not all Mexicans are rapists, as Donald Trump claims. And so on and so forth. The idea is context is important. And the third thing for us was to provide a plurality of perspectives that cut across borders, backgrounds, and beliefs. What do we mean by that? What we mean is very simply that we wanted voices from different parts of the world to inform each other and educate each other. And today we have 1,700 plus contributors from over 70 countries. That's our website. If you scroll down, you will see the diversity of content. That's the world this week, which I write. Climate change matters, and so do other species. That's, of course, the multimedia element, which you're very good. In fact, everywhere I've traveled so far, I have been impressed by the quality of people I've met. I have been impressed by the insights. But the one thing where you beat everyone else is the quality of your video. I've been waxing lyrical about it to your faculty. If I had my proverbial hat, I would have taken it off. And so the multimedia content is also there. And to give you a pictorial introduction to the Fair Observer story, I will run you through a pictorial presentation, and it will come up maybe more than a minute or two. And in the meantime, I shall take the liberty of telling you that in the age of the internet, to do all of this, you need both a channel that is really wide, meaning that anyone from around the world can write for us. That includes 16-year-olds in Gaza, and that includes retired prime ministers from Ireland. But the filter has to be very strong. What do we mean by that? Let's say if we publish everyone, including ranting and raving and racist xenophobes and people who are completely wrong on the facts, will you come to the website again? No, because it wouldn't be worth your time. So what are we? In the age of the deluge, what we are trying to do is provide you one clear stream, one clear lake, one clear river, wherein we have a certain quality control. We take the pollution out. We take the lies, we take the diatribe, we take the parochial mentality of many of the content creators on the internet out. And we do so by doing three things. Number one, having a clear set of contributor guidelines. Number two, by having an extraordinary editing team. Abul Hasan al-Siddiq is the author of the Arab Uprisings. Excellent, outstanding editor. Anna Pivovarchuk, as you can guess from the name, very Russian name, is someone who has studied literature and history, is a phenomenal editor. You look at us, three of us, the names will tell you all. Abul Hasanat tells you all from a particular part of the world. Atul tells you all Sanskrit roots. Anna tells you all. It's a very diverse crew. And that diversity helps us edit better in the sense that if it's anything to do with India, I sort of know that part of the world. I know England and other parts, so we can fact check more quickly. If it is Russia, then so on and so forth. Middle East, Africa, etc., etc. And so those are the two things. What is the third thing? The third thing we had to do over time is educate many of our contributors, because a lot of you have great stories. I heard that you wanted to talk about storytelling, or you wanted me to talk about storytelling, some people in the audience there. Storytelling is brilliant. It is important, but you need to learn how to tell a story. It is a craft. Right from framing the narrative to stringing together facts in a necklace like a pearl. Sorry, stringing together facts like pearls in a necklace. To telling it compellingly enough that someone in another part of the world, let's say the other side of the world, China, finds it equally compelling to read as, let's say, someone on this side of the hemisphere in Chile or Argentina or Canada does. And that is an art. Why do we read Shakespeare? Because Shakespeare cuts across time and space. If you're relevant after a long period of time, like a Homer or a Kalidas, chances are you told a great story. And so for us, the third element was educating people to tell great stories. And that is why I came here, because we are not exactly terribly strong in Latin America. And so I came as a guest of Juan to do the Voices of the World program so that we would have narratives, stories, and voices from this part of the world that may have never been heard before. And so, look at us there. The slideshow will take you through it all. In the beginning, a few were connected with a few. You look at the camels in a desert. Then, today, with the internet, everyone is connected with everyone. And we have lots of choices, as you can see in a supermarket, too many. It leads to confusion. We are deluged, let's go back, with information, bombarding us all the time, all right? And we have too many choices, all right? Then we go on. Deluged with information, just too much of it. So what is the challenge of the media today? It's not necessarily distribution, because you can distribute via the internet, with Facebook, with Twitter, etc. But even more importantly, what you need is to distill the information, to get the impurities out. I went to tequila the other day, and the most important part of the process is distillation. And so that is the big role of an editor today, to distill and purify, provide you information that matters, particularly in a time-truncated society, which all of us are becoming. All right, carry on. What are we about? We are not about the news. We are about the deeper issues behind the news. You'll not come to Fair Observer to find out what's happening. You'll come to find out why things are happening and what are the different narratives through which you can see what is happening. Yes, please. As I said, it's not about one definite view. It's about a plurality of perspectives from around the world. And so what do? We cut through the noise of an open platform through an editorial filter based on analytical rigor and factual accuracy. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you're an Islamist in the Middle East, you can write for us. If you are a conservative Catholic here, you can write for us. I may not agree with you, but I will publish you if you're right on the facts and you make a good argument. That is it. Every perspective is welcome, because I believe, and we believe as an organization, that discourse needs diversity and debate, that we need to confront ourselves with opinions we don't agree with, that we need to engage. That is the whole point of living in a society. Otherwise, we could go to the forest or run away to our little cults, as some people north of the border are doing. Okay? And the idea is that we educate our audience to become citizens of the world. In the process, we have also had to educate many of our contributors. In the process, I'm here as an educator to educate people about the importance of context, the importance of philosophy, the importance of questioning assumptions, the importance of history, the importance of backstory, the importance of looking at things with an open mind and with concentration, reflection, and perhaps a bit of doubt. And so there you go. So even though there are lots of voices and noises, there are certain dominant players who dominates world news. The Economist, which is wonderful. It began in 1843. It's a very Oxford and Cambridge view of the world. They opposed India's independence from 1843 to 1947. They also like a chap called Piena Nieta, which I'm finding out doesn't seem to be that popular. Now, I don't know much about Mexico to comment, but what I do know is that I want to hear voices from Mexico about Mexican matters, not just The Economist. Foreign affairs is very Americano. Foreign policy is Washington, D.C., DuPont Circle. The BBC, Al Jazeera, etc., they're all decent, actually. The BBC is wonderful. But the BBC is a very London-based organization. Al Jazeera is a very Qatar-based organization. The New York Times is New York. Wall Street Journal is now owned by Rupert Murdoch. I leave you to figure out what you think of it. This is the man who also owns News of the World and owns Fox News. So perhaps the Wall Street Journal may not be quite the publication it once was, or maybe it is. Maybe in his old age, you know, he is redeeming himself. We don't know. The Financial Times is a jolly good publication. I like it a lot, but it has a certain worldview. Again, it's Oxbridge, just like The Economist. In fact, it was owned by the same people who owned The Economist until recently. And so these are all top-down. These are all top-down, credible sources, but top-down. Their fact-checking is good. Their English is good. Their styles are good. But they are all top-down. All right, next. So what are we? We are very different. We have more in-depth analysis than the first sources. We don't have the anonymity of The Economist. The Economist has a lot of very young people from Oxbridge writing as if they were 50-year-olds. With us, you know who's writing, most of the time, actually, the vast majority of the time, unless people are at risk of life and limb. And in some places, as I'm told in Mexico, journalists are at risk, dissidents are at risk. So perhaps in those cases, anonymity is important, but that's not the norm for us, okay? And we have contributors who build a reputation. It's much more of a bottom-up view. As I say, it's the on-the-ground or people who have information on the ground. And unlike foreign policy, we are open content. They are much more behind a paywall. Okay, next. This is the 360-degree analysis, which we do very proudly. As you can see, football is a sport popular here. And so you can see football, but that's the context piece. And to the right are many perspectives on the same issue. Any story will have a context piece which will tell you the background and why is it important, and then many perspectives on the issue. Yes. And so that is the end of the story in terms of this is how we ask people to join the team, to contribute, to donate, because we are a Section 501c3 nonprofit. And the reason we are a nonprofit is that if you are a for-profit, you have a conflict between maximizing returns for your shareholders and informing and educating the public. So we wanted to do away with the conflict. And so this is our story. It began from an idea in the back of my mind in childhood. It came together with a group of like-minded people who wanted a more global, more plural discourse with the goal to inform and educate. We are fighting our own battle in the age of the internet. The internet is a double-edged sword. We could not do this without the internet, because the internet enables us to communicate with people around the world, not just via email, not just via Dropbox or Google Drive, but also via Skype or Google Hangouts. So the internet enables a large number of people across different parts of the world to collaborate, to communicate, to work together in teams. And the internet, as I said, offers both promise and peril. The promise is we could all really work better together. We could all use the internet to be better informed and to be better educated, provided we cut out the distraction. The peril is that we may want to watch cat videos on YouTube instead of watching a video about, let's say, Mexican history. We might also suffer the challenge of monopolists or semi-monopolists, or actually Facebook is a monopolist, as is Google, banning photos as of the girl running naked during the Vietnam War, the image that changed American public opinion. But that photo does not pass Facebook guidelines. So the peril is we may be now getting a new kind of big brother, perhaps not the CIA, but now Papa Zuckerberg, who decides what's right, what's wrong, what's moral, what's immoral. So with that in mind, both the promise and the peril, I urge you to embrace the promise. I welcome questions, and I thank you all for the honor and privilege of addressing you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Atul. We now are going to begin a session of questions and answers. So please take seat.
Thank you, thank you. You want me to sit here, here?
Wherever you like.
I will sit anywhere you want me to.
Okay. Okay, so our first question.
Yes.
Granted, the internet democratized info, but some argue we now live in a post-fact world, like with the current US election. So do you agree, and why?
Could you repeat what you said?
Yeah.
Which world? What world?
This world. What?
No, which, you said... fact world. Yeah, the great term. Yes, I alluded to it. In some ways, we do. I mean, it's theater of the absurd. This is a man who's accused of kissing women without their will. He brags about grabbing them by X. I won't complete the sentence. And this is a man who's leading a party that is against abortion, a party that believes in family values. This is just beyond ridiculous. So yes, for a large section of society anywhere in the world, because of the echo chamber phenomenon, yes, people are living in a post-fact world, but they are also living not because of the internet, but because of certain social changes. Because with over 7 billion people on the planet, there is certainly a lot of anger, there is a lot of frustration, but there's also been a systematic underinvestment in education. And that has been allied with, technology keeping us distracted. And so in a world where everyone is undereducated and distracted, it is easy to live in a post-fact world, but I think hopefully there'll be a pushback. The pendulum always swings, as some of us who have lived a little longer, and some of us who've talked to those who have lived much longer than us will tell you that the pendulum swings. And I think we are reaching that stage that some pushback will come. Hopefully. I hope so.
Next question is, why aren't more traditional news outlets using listicles as part of their online content?
Using what? Using?
Listicles. That's
listicles?
Yeah.
Can someone educate me? What is listicle? Yes, please. Pardon me? Lists. Oh, why aren't they using lists?
To condense information, like why aren't more traditional news outlets using listicles or lists to condense complex information for a wider consumer?
Good question. So it could be a question for me, is that why don't we have compressed information? Usually we have long form content, and people say, look, you're producing long form content at a time when people don't have time to read. And the answer is, well, we could perhaps produce summaries, but that takes money. And one of the things I didn't talk about is the revenue models of traditional newspapers have been knocked out. And we are having to struggle too. Why is that? Because look, when you go to the internet, you're not paying, no one is paying, but servers cost something, the labor of editors is something, and the traffic is not high enough to get much advertising, because advertising in any case now goes via Google and Facebook. So some of it is lack of resources, some of it is old ways of thinking. In our case, lists wouldn't help as much because we are not a news organization. But perhaps, you know, it's a combination of both rigidity, old habits die hard, and also perhaps lack of resources. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
How do you decide what kind of information is relevant?
How do we decide what information is relevant? Well, the answer to that question is fairly straightforward. If, let's say, if it's a story about a Mexican soap opera star, and I am told you have lots of soap operas, right?
Yeah.
And that soap opera star was having an affair with a football star. Maybe the football star plays for a big club. And there was another story about systematic underinvestment in public schooling and the decline of public schooling in, let's say, any part of Mexico, whether Mexico City or Yucatan, across the last 20, 30 years. Guess which story is more important?
Okay.
So the answer is, what is the broader social impact of the phenomenon? Is this an issue? Is this an event? Is this a trend of significance? Does it affect human lives, not just today, but in the long term? And that is the answer. So you won't find sports generally on the website. You certainly won't find soap opera stars.
Okay. Thank you. Should journalists show the news in an objective or a personal point of view?
Ooh la la. Whose question was it? Ooh la la. What's your name? Myra. Brilliant question. Myra, brilliant question.
Thank you.
Ooh la la. That's a philosophical question. Well, first of all, what is objective? I mean, the objective myth is a very, I mean, of course, everyone tries to be objective, but it's a very American myth. And the American myth is this, that you have to be objective and the journalist has no opinion and you just have to represent the facts. But the reality is that we are all in a procession, to steal a metaphor from E.H. Carr, who was a legendary historian who wrote What is History? And that applies to media, that applies to anything. We are all in a procession, and our view of the world is determined by where we are in that procession. So my ancestral village is next to where Buddhism began, Sarnath. So you look at this, what is this? This is, you know, a bit of, this is from obviously China, but it has a bit of a pagoda. It's not exactly from my part of the world, but philosophically, it is connected to my part of the world. This, of course, is African with my name on it, which was a gift. But the point is that I am defined by the fact that I come philosophically from a Buddhist point of view. And not just any point of view. For me, it's a matter of great pride because it was born in the soil where the blood of my ancestors has spilled. And so I'm naturally resistant to top-down authority. I'm naturally irreverent because I think I'll go and figure things out and meditate. It's a very different view from a Catholic view where you have the doctrine of papal infallibility, where you belong to a church and the church lays down the canon. And so whatever I do, it'll reflect in my writing. And so news, to answer your question specifically, if it is a news event, one should try to be as objective as possible, for sure. Because you don't want to start opining about, okay, there was a bomb blast and 20 people died. You don't want to start imagining 25 died. You don't want to start imagining the facts. So there is a certain importance to have fidelity to the facts. Absolutely. But the moment you move into analysis, you will be informed by your philosophical beliefs or assumptions. You will be informed by a historical background. You will certainly be influenced by your social class. And so for me, I think that when it comes to analysis of any event, you have to be upfront instead of pretend that, oh, this analysis is all value neutral. That's the fraud that modern day economics perpetuates. I gave a TEDx on economics is an art, not a science, in which I mocked the whole thing. It's like economics assumes a lot of moral values instead of actually putting them out in the open. And so, yes, when it comes to pure reporting, stick to the facts. But the moment you shift to commentary, be open about it, but try to have an open mind and argue rigorously. And be thorough with your assumptions and have a certain grit to your philosophical underpinning. Have some sense of consistency. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you very much, Atul, for your words, your knowledge. What?
No, carry on. Could I make a quick request before we close it?
Sure.
Okay, since we live in the day and age of social media, and since all of you are on Facebook and Twitter, before we call it a day, could I request you to follow us on Facebook? The website is up. To follow us on Twitter, to subscribe to our newsletter. When you go to the website, you can just enter your email and get your friends to do so as well. We rely on you. We want you to read us. We want you to write for us. We want you to share us. And we want you to create a new narrative for Latin America in general and for Mexico in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Atul.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Really, your knowledge and your project is really important for us. So we'd like to give you a little gift from Mexico.
That's a big gift.
Yeah, a little souvenir so you can remember us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And we hope your staying here is...
Thank you.
It's a great experience.
It's a wonderful experience. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.